Thank you all so much. As Lily mentioned, my name is Laura Egan Krauser. I use she, her pronouns, and I live and work here in Louisville. That's how we say it. I'm sorry about that. It's out of my control. Yeah, today I'm going to be talking to you about a research project that I've been added on in the last 6 months and was able to travel through Peru in this project. But my presentation is going to focus on kind of the context of where we were working, the organizational partnerships that allowed for community engaged cartography, and move into talking about trying to engage students in a community-led project outside of the US. And yeah, really excited to get into it. I am starting with this quote from Luciana Yapu, who is a community member of Qenqo, where this work is centered. The quote says, "When I was a child, I saw my community with plenty of grass and many animals. Everything was abundant, with excellent harvests. The lake was full of water." This is really important perspective from lived on-the-ground experience of Qenqo. And as Luciana has mentioned, the lake was full of water. There was abundance and excellent harvests, but the community has experienced a lot of environmental change over time. So their lifeways are at risk. Communities throughout the Peruvian Andes and the Andes mountain range in general are threatened by global climate patterns that affect things like the rate at which montane glaciers are melting. Those montane glaciers feed systems of lifeways that are ancient. And these external pressures of climate change and environmental degradation have presented themselves very intimately in communities who live with their environmental components as members of their community. And that includes the community of Qenqo, which is an Andean indigenous community that is about 4,000 meters above sea level north of Qusco. You can see that there are rolling hills. Here's an image of Lake Coricocha in the distance. Here's some rush hour traffic in Qenqo. But this community is perched in the Andes, relies on grazing agriculture and subsistence agriculture, as well as the water systems and the natural environment to feed their survival. And they're thriving in their home. I have two maps here. One is to show you more global perspective on where Qenqo is. This second panel on the right shows Qusco right here in the center of the map. You can see the relief of the area. Just outside of Qusco is the mouth of the Sacred Valley, which Qenqo is above. It's a community of about 400 people, 80 families. And as I've mentioned, Laguna Coricocha, the main water source of the area, is a member of the community. It historically has not been separate from the people who live and leverage the water resource to aid in survival. And this is Lake Coricocha. We'll see it from very many different angles in how people orient, but Qusco is in the south. We have Laguna Coricocha here, and we'll see it over and over again. This is where most of the community members live, just north of the lake. And around Laguna Coricocha are rolling hills that support subsistence agriculture and grazing of sheep and alpacas. Again, much of this is subsistence, but you'll see throughout this presentation greenhouses that have been built. The community of Qenqo has been engaging in commodity agriculture as of the last probably 50 years, growing strawberries most recently to sell for export in these greenhouses. These are potatoes being grown. So as mentioned, there's environmental change occurring at a high rate. People within generations are seeing the recession of waters in Laguna Coricocha in particular. This is a satellite image from 2016. You can see Laguna Coricocha's outline there. And if we slide over to imagery from 2020, we can see that there has been significant recession, and I'll slide this back and forth so that you can look at the changes on the landscape from a satellite's perspective, and I'll call attention to the eastern and the northwestern kind of shores of the lake to show the surface area changes in the water. From the ground, which is how most people experience the world. This change is also very significant and obvious even in the last 5 years, between the photos taken in 2020 on the left and 2024 on the right. This degrading structure that was in part of the lake is now very visibly now part of the shore. And again, that's happened really rapidly in this area, as experienced by the people who are using the water resources. Another important development and change is the addition of hundreds of the greenhouses that I mentioned for strawberry export. There's lots of subsistence agriculture happening, but the primary reason for the building of those greenhouses is for strawberries, which are pretty water intensive, especially if they're protected from rainfall during the rainy season. So this, again, is the area where most people live in Qenqo, and between 2016 and 2020, we can see just a really rapid growth in terms of the number of greenhouses on the landscape. The greenhouses are represented, or are visually these white boxy areas that are not nearly as prevalent in that 2016 image. So community members of Qenqo are concerned about their water resources, not only for their traditional lifeways, but to engage with commodity economy like strawberry exports, and potentially even bringing in tourism and engaging in Peru's vast touristic economies. So they've partnered with various NGOs, Alianza Andina and Campesina Forestal, to identify large-scale water conservation efforts as a way to mitigate the effects of climate variability and environmental degradation in Qenqo. These organizations are their channels to capital to support the projects that they've identified. The Andean Alliance for Sustainable Development, or Alianza Andina, focuses on two major projects, Qenqo being one of them, and coffee co-op in the Peruvian Amazon as another project. They're working with farming communities and bring in experiential learning opportunities to the area. And then Campesina Forestal emerged from the community of Qenqo's efforts for water conservation. And they're looking to, as it says here, regreen the Andes for the future. That's not a direct translation for the record. So some of the methods that the community has identified as efforts or areas where they want to put their efforts to conserve water includes afforestation. So I'm sure folks are familiar with deforestation or reforestation. Well, this kind of subalpine area is an area that hasn't experienced forests potentially ever in its recent geologic history. So afforestation is the bringing of forests into a place where there have not historically been forests. So they have a goal of planting over 1 million trees in Qenqo with a mix of native species and pine. The goal with pine is to have a rapidly growing tree that allows to ensure lumber in the future, but also is a more quicker solution to fixing water in the soil and help stabilize soils. Nativos are to protect the land in a more long-term way and provide habitat for wildlife. An example of the Qenqo tree is on the top there. They're shrubby, small trees, and those do naturally grow in the environment. I mentioned it's not a forested area, but this is the kind of natural flora that would be found. Another solution that the community of Qenqo has been working on is an additional reservoir. So Laguna Coricocha is a massive water resource that we've seen is experiencing some intense change. But just west of that, in some of the channels that feed Laguna Coricocha, the community has built a reservoir upstream to help with water storage and ensure water security during that oscillation of dry season and rainy season. It slows the water down on the landscape, which historically feeds water very quickly over the soil. And finally, Qenqo has identified the building of terraces, which is a traditional practice for indigenous folks in the area and descendants of the Incas. So these slopes in the area, again, historically, water runs quite quickly off of them, and the eyebrow terraces have a goal of slowing that water down to capture rainwater and store it to fix it in the soil. This is a couple of examples of communities, the community building those terraces, which our students got to contribute to on our last work day, which brings us to students in Peru. So this is a really awesome community that has found different ways to engage with their own environmental management futures with agency and self-determination. And we've been able to plug in due to a connection that we have with the Alianza Andina. There's a graduate from our PhD program in education that works for Alianza Andina and identified the University of Louisville Speed School as an opportunity to bring students for cultural exchange and all kinds of good stuff that comes from that. And this program I've only recently gotten involved with. Its history has been kind of all throughout Peru, where Alianza Andina has taken folks to the Amazonian coffee plantations. And in the last couple of years has been working with Qenqo. Where we plug in as the Center for GIS is in environmental monitoring. So as the community plans and implements water retention efforts, there's an opportunity for geospatial tools to plug in and support those efforts and understand via a system of record, but also projecting into the future how the decisions on the landscape are affecting their ability to fix water on the landscape. And so the goals of Project Coricocha are determined by the community, and we as a group of students and educators and researchers are responsive to those goals over the course of a 5-day work week in Peru. It's a blip in terms of the history of the project, the efforts that are going on all the time in the area to fix water. And in those 5 days, we're looking to create an understanding of tree survival rate. So how many trees that get planted are going to survive and support water fixation over time. Reservoir monitoring, how much water is being stored in that reservoir, and eyebrow terrace establishment. So helping support the process of building eyebrow terraces for water fixation. And these goals came from a participatory mapping workshop. So community members worked with Alianza Andina and Campesina Forestal over a series of weeks with aerial imagery from those base maps that we see all the time, from Google Maps, et cetera, to look at Laguna Coricocha and kind of imagine what solutions would be best implemented where. So you can see that this is an amalgamation of many different conversations about where certain pieces of the puzzle are going to fit to help support water conservation in the area. And our organization has digitized that as a means to manage, well, we did, I promise. well, we did digitize those contributions from community members to understand how we could contribute the co-production of spatial data with community members while we're in the field. So when we're in the field, we work on all three of those prongs of their water fixation project, one of which is geotagging trees. As I mentioned, we're trying to establish some kind of survival rate for trees. We want to know the growth rate and essentially how well this particular project is working for the community. So the students this past August, over the course of 4 days, geotagged 71 new trees. The community has planted over 100,000 trees at this point, so they're a tenth of the way to their goal. And we are doing that environmental monitoring piece using GIS tools and GPS in the field. We tagged 72 new trees and updated 32 you all 32 existing trees to look at the growth rate. As you might expect, the pines are growing at a faster rate than the nativos, but the nativos have a higher survival rate than the pines do in the area. As for working with the reservoir and the eyebrow terraces, we acquired drone data for the reservoir area. This is building on work we've done in 2023 and 2024, gathering drone data of the whole area. So we are in the midst of working through a workflow to understand how much water is being stored in the reservoir. The community is interested in elevating the reservoir retaining wall another meter to see how much more water they can store. The reservoir is a really interesting case because the community, through community work days, built this on their own. They engineered it. And now the municipality of Qenqo is very interested in the community's work, interested in bringing bobcats and backhoes up to help out, of which the community is very wary about. So having an idea of the success and the existing kind of structure of the reservoir is really important to them. If they do accept support or any kind of money from the municipality, they want to be sure that they have record of what work they have done so that they can continue building on that, so they can hold their the municipality accountable for any detrimental changes that occur in the area. We also acquired drone imagery for the eyebrow terrace areas before and after the terraces were built. And that happened on our last project day. There's a FENA, which is a traditional community work day where over 60 community members came out. The partnership organizations actually paid each community member a wage to be there. But 60 community members came out using their traditional knowledge and support from our GNSS units, built these terraces at similar elevation across a hillside to trap that water. And students were able to get their hands dirty and the biggest fear is so they were able to work alongside ancestors of terrace builders as engineering students in a global hub of engineering, which is something that I was really trying to drive home with the students, that the students were not bringing special knowledge, only really special tools to bring to bear on this project that would have happened whether we came to that space or not. So I think it was a really important day. The students were able to share with the 60 community members all the different tools that we were using. We've been tagging trees, so when a community member takes the road and they see yellow tags on the trees, what do those mean? How is this feeding into your community goals? What is this large orange thing that we've been carrying around all week? It's a GPS unit. And we took a couple of drone photos as a group. And we're able to understand the progress or the kind of quantitative efforts over the course of a day from the community, from the drone imagery. So hundreds of meters of terraces built in a day on this hillside, which we could quantify using the drone imagery. And as I mentioned, we have this this digitization of the community map, I don't know why that's happening. This digitization of the community map that keeps all of the data, all the environmental monitoring data that we acquire while we're in Peru, and is in the hands of the Qenqo community leadership and Campesina Forestal and Alianza Andina. Of course, we have challenges. I think that it's inherent that there are challenges. I will say challenging as a scholar to be a part of this, who was not a part of the project design, but really kind of coupled into a community mapping project that occurred without kind of the methodology design that I would have implemented. There's, of course, logistical challenges with students getting to Peru. We also had a drone confiscated in Lima, and we never saw it again. So there are, of course, challenges that we run into when you're traveling with a group of people. I also want to mention that there is a double language barrier, English to Spanish, Spanish to Quechua. These are Quechua-speaking communities, and so there is absolutely a risk of abstracting any information that we get through that double filter of language. And we had 2 translators, one of whom could translate English to Quechua, but the other was Spanish to Quechua. And so we had lots of chains of communication, which takes time, and in my estimation is worth it. So there are a lot of dynamics in this project, and what I want to kind of emphasize here is that there are lots of ways that we enforce kind of the positivism or the kind of perspective that the scientific method gets at some kind of objective reality. We are in this process of exhaustively documenting and measuring what is observable, which has a very specific colonial history in our scientific method. And in working with engineers at an engineering school, it's a really interesting dynamic to implement something like a community mapping project and work to center the community mapping goals. Of course, with the drone imagery and mapping, we have the reinforcement that our kind of, ocular centrism, the above perspective is the true perspective or the objective perspective. We have researcher positionality. I wasn't aware of Qenqo until I was invited onto this project. I don't speak Quechua. I hardly speak Spanish. So there are a lot of components of reverence and listening that need to be kind of a part of this reflexive process between students and community. I've mentioned this kind of exhaustive documentation of what is material and observable and how that has a masculinist history. And there's also this driving complexity of capital behind the whole project. So the community allying themselves with nonprofits that are leveraging their international communities to funnel money to this community so that they're globally competitive or regionally competitive with commodity exports is a layer to the project. Bringing in tourism and joining the Peruvian touristic activities is a layer to the project. But what I find compelling about the project is that I think it is an excellent example of community-driven priorities. I think it's an excellent example of self-determination and environmental management, and I hope to continue to center the perspectives and the priorities of the community as we continue this work for years to come. So thank you all so much for your time.